A little over a month ago, my wife Sam had received an urgent phone call from her mother. Apparently, her father had an accident at work and had suffered some injuries. Sam's father was an exceptionally large man who gave off an extremely intimidating aura. For the majority of his life, he has worked in steel processing plants. To me, he always seemed like the kind of guy who would say, "If you aren't getting your hands dirty, then are you even working?" According to her mother, one of the pallets of steel had buckled and came crashing down. Some of these smaller shards of metal were sent flying and struck her father in the leg and arm. He had been taken to the hospital and was forced to remain there for a few days. Sam and I live a few states away from her parents, so having to find the time to visit was quite challenging. We seem to only barely manage visits during the holidays, and sometimes not even then. However, the moment Sam heard her father had been injured, she immediately dropped everything and made travel arrangements. I wanted to go with her, but my work rarely gives out time off, even during these trying times. They seem to have the mentality of, if you don't wish to work, then, well, we'll find someone who will. To say I was livid was an understatement, but I just bit my tongue and headed home. Sam assured me that it would be fine, that I shouldn't worry myself. I knew she was trying to put myself at ease, but still, I felt terrible. She left for the airport about a week after she had received the news. Meanwhile, all I could do was work and try my best not to worry. Sam did her best to update me through her stages of travel. She arrived later in the evening and told me she had made it to her parents' house around midnight. Over the course of the next few days, she kept me apprised of her father's condition. He had the few minor shards removed and was just spending time healing. He was scheduled to be discharged from the hospital after only a couple of days of observation. Meanwhile, Sam was doing her best to help her mother around the house while they waited for him to come home. During this time, my job seemed to be piling on project after project. I could clearly see myself turning into some sort of workforce zombie. Before I knew it, nearly a week and a half had passed since Sam had left. I checked my phone and looked at the calendar. Sam would be coming home the following day. She told me that since the flights were such short notice, that she'd be arriving very late in the evening. She said she would just grab a cab home and that she'd see me in the morning. I wanted to stay awake for her arrival, but as soon as I got home from work, I made the mistake of falling exhaustively on the bed. The next thing I knew, it was 6 o'clock in the morning. I cracked open my eyes, excited to see Sam sleeping next to me, but as I reached over, I found that she wasn't there. I grabbed my phone off the nightstand to check and see if she had left me any messages. I thought perhaps her flight had gotten delayed, and that she'd be arriving either today or tomorrow instead. Though when I turned it on, I'd received no new messages since the previous night. I got out of bed and was in the middle of sending Sam a text, asking her if she was alright, when I was nearly startled out of my skin by someone standing in my kitchen. I turned on the light, and after a few seconds, I recognized Sam was standing there, holding a cup of coffee. I quickly walked over to her and embraced her, telling her how glad I was that she had made it home safely. She just returned a faint smile and set her mug down. I asked her what time she made it in, and she said only a couple of hours ago, but that she didn't want to disturb me while I slept. I thought this was sort of odd, as she probably knows better than anyone how heavy a sleeper I am. She let a soft sigh escape her lips before telling me that she was starting to feel pretty tired herself. I told her once again that I was glad she was back, but that I had to get ready for work. I quickly got changed and grabbed my bag from the counter. When I did, I noticed another oddity. The mug Sam was holding, that she had set down on the counter, was entirely spotless, like there had been no liquid ever poured into it. Normally when she has coffee, there are some coffee stains on the inside of the mug, but it looked as if she had just pulled it out of the cupboard. Perhaps she just rinsed it out, I thought as I continued my way out of the door. After a long day at work, I returned home in the evening and walked through the front door. As I was shuffling off my bag, I felt as though I wasn't alone in the living room, despite not immediately seeing anybody. As my eyes drifted around, I noticed Sam was sitting on the couch staring at the TV. I walked over to her and asked her what she was doing. She just returned a faint smile and said that she was watching the news. I glanced over and looked at the black TV screen. I asked her if she was feeling alright, and she just shook her head saying that she was fine. I couldn't seem to form words, but I was far too exhausted to press any further. I told her I was going to jump in the shower and then head to bed early that night. She said alright and that she'd come to bed later on. As I was heading down the hallway, I stopped and glanced back at Sam, who seemed to resume watching the black TV screen. I took a very long shower after that, and after I finished, I opened the door to the bathroom. When I did, I nearly jumped back in fright at the sight of Sam standing mere inches away on the other side of the door. I asked her with exasperation what she was doing, and she was just smiling, saying that she had to use the bathroom. Clutching my chest, I told her she should have just knocked like always, and she chalked it up to her forgetfulness. After trading positions with her, I got changed and climbed into bed. As I laid there, I couldn't help my mind from wondering if something had happened to her when she had visited her parents. She had been acting strange ever since she had returned home. I tried to rationalize it as maybe just exhaustion from travel, or perhaps dealing with her father took more of a toll on her than I thought. The next couple of days passed by and it was filled with much more strange behavior from Sam. I'd find her just staring off into space, or in strange places throughout the house. For example, one day I found her just standing in the closet, like she was deciding on what to wear, but she had been in there for an extended amount of time. However, the creepiest thing she had done was last night. I had been startled awake by a noise at roughly 3 o'clock in the morning. I couldn't place the sound's origins in my mind, so I got up and noticed Sam wasn't in bed. I called out to her, asking if she was around. Upon hearing no response, I got out of bed and began making my way towards the door. I walked throughout the house, checking every possible room that I thought she could be in. After coming up empty-handed, I felt a pang of worry form in my stomach. As I absent-mindedly looked around, I caught a glance out of the window overlooking our backyard. Someone was standing out there, in the dark. As I drew closer, I noticed that it was Sam. She was standing in the center of the backyard, looking up at the sky, and appeared to be muttering something. I quickly rushed out to her, and I asked her what she was doing. She almost seemed to snap to her senses, and told me she was just talking to herself. I briefly glanced around and saw no one nearby. I quietly guided her back inside and managed to get her back to bed. Right up until I drifted off, I was beginning to worry something was seriously wrong with Sam, and was considering calling a professional for help. The next morning, as I was getting ready for work, I entered the kitchen to get a cup of coffee, and I saw Sam standing next to the window staring out towards our backyard. I asked her if she was alright, and she just nodded to me. Just before I headed out of the door, I realized I had forgotten my phone on the nightstand. I quickly rushed back into the bedroom to retrieve my phone. When I did, I noticed I had a missed call. When I checked the voicemail, I learned that it was a call from a hospital. They were calling in regards to my wife. I called the number back and with much confusion asked about my wife. They informed me that my wife had been in an accident and had been in the hospital for the past week. I was beyond confused by this point, as I told them they must have made a mistake. They then transferred the call to my wife's hospital room, where she answered the phone, and I heard Sam's voice come through the receiver. I felt a cold sweat break out over my entire body. She told me that she had been in a car accident on the way home from the airport. She didn't remember much aside from landing and hailing a cab. I asked why they hadn't contacted me sooner, and she said that her purse and phone with all her identification had gone missing during the accident. She had been in and out of consciousness for the majority of the week. I could feel my pulse starting to quicken as she told me something she did remember about the crash, something she neglected to tell anyone else. She said that someone had appeared on the dark road. The cab driver swerved out of the way, and crashed into a ditch of overgrowth. She could feel herself fading in and out of consciousness, but right before, she watched as a figure stood over her. She described it as looking similar to an alien, smooth gray skin that had an almost wet-like appearance to it. The face was nearly featureless, with 2 small slits for eyes and pinpoints in the center for nostrils. She stifled a slight chuckle at the absurdity, saying that it was a product of her accident, and I wanted to laugh along with her, but my throat was bone dry. She told me that the doctors were clearing her to be released the next day, and that I could come pick her up. I apologized for not being at her side, and she told me that it wasn't my fault, that I had no way of knowing where she was. She told me she had to get some rest, but was excited to see me tomorrow. I agreed and hung up the phone. I stood there in the bedroom gripping the phone tightly, trying to stop my body from shaking. If Sam was in the hospital, then who was in my living room? I opened the bedroom door and walked down the hallway. A cool breeze brushed against me as I noticed the living room window was open. The window that the Sam who had been here the past week had been standing in front of. I'm not sure who or what that thing was that had been impersonating my wife. I just hope to God that it never comes back.